Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let us take the next chapter on the book of Libaas was Zeena from Abbad ibn Tamim, reporting from his uncle that he saw the Prophet lying down in the masjid, placing one foot upon the other. We took in the previous hadith, in the track just before this, that the Prophet forbade lying down on your back and putting one foot over the other. And the reason for that is because if you're just wearing one clothing, let's say the izar with nothing underneath, then you risk exposing your awrah. And we find in this narration the Prophet is doing exactly what he forbade in the previous narration. He is lying down with one foot over the other. And so we say the reason for the prohibition is that it exposes your awrah, or at least risks exposing the awrah. But as for if you can guarantee that your awrah will not be exposed, then there is nothing wrong with lying down in this sort of fashion. Also, we can take from this narration the humility of the Prophet ﷺ. He was lying down in the masjid just like any other person would lie down in the masjid. So it's not like he was afforded special treatment. The next chapter about the prohibition for men to wear za'afran, which is saffron. From Anas bin Malik, he says that the Prophet forbade za'afran, and one of the narrators, Hammad, says that this prohibition is for men. We said before that za'afran, which translates to saffron, which is a type of plant, its dye gives off a yellow color, as opposed to usfur, which is a safflower, whose dye gives off a reddish color. The prohibition in this narration is about putting on the za'afran on your skin, and this would be an imitation of women. Women are allowed to put za'afran on their skin, but men are not. As for the clothing, then za'afran and usfur are not allowed to be put on, and men are not allowed to imitate women. The next chapter about dyeing the white hair with yellow or red, but not with black. Jabir ibn Abdullah reports that a man called Abu Quhafa was led to the Prophet on the day when Mecca was conquered, and his head and beard were white, like the thagam plant, which is a pure white plant. And the Prophet said, غَيِّرُوا هَذَا بِشَيْءٍ وَاجْتَنِبُوا السَّوَادِ. Change this, meaning the whiteness of his hair, with something, but avoid black. So why should black be avoided, yet other colors do not need to be avoided? Well, because as a person grows older, it is natural that his hair turn white. And this is the decree of Allah Jalla wa Ala. White hair for the mu'min is a blessing because the white hair will be a nur, a light for him on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So the Prophet informed us authentically, لا تنتف الشيب فإنه نور المؤمن يوم القيامة. So dyeing it with black means you're reversing the process. You're essentially opposing the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because your hair was initially black and then it turns white through the ni'mah and qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and then you dye it black again, so you're opposing what Allah Jalla wa Ala has decreed for you. And then there is an element of deception. So for example, an old man may dye his hair black so he looks younger and proposes marriage. The woman thinks that he is younger, whereas if she had known that he was older and had white hair, maybe she would refuse him. So in this there is something of a tadlis. You outwardly make something appear to seem one way, whereas in fact it is not. If you dye your hair other than black, then everyone knows that you've dyed your hair and that you are older than you may look. This prohibition applies both to men and to women. We take from the prohibition that other colors besides black are allowed to be dyed with. If your hair is naturally ginger or blonde, then dyeing it in that color would be prohibited for you, because the illah is the same, the justification is the same. Some people have their hair turning white when they are young, even when they are, let's say, 20 years of age. Can we give them a special exception to dye their hair black again? The answer is that the hadith is general and we ought to follow the hadith and not be making exceptions from our own selves without a strong reason to do so. But here's a question: if somebody's hair, let's say, is ginger naturally, we say that if his hair now turn white, it is forbidden for him to dye it ginger, his original color, making the analogy with the one whose hair is naturally black, which is what this hadith is speaking about. However, there remains the question, this person whose hair is ginger, can he dye his hair black when his hair turn white? This is interesting. We say it is safer for him not to do so and dye it with any other color. So for the ginger person then, if his hair turn white, we say to him, do not dye your hair ginger, and according to this hadith, do not dye your hair black either.
Although the other opinion, which says that for such a person he can dye his hair black, would be an understandable one, because black is not his natural color, hence there is no element of deception.
The next chapter is linked to the previous one about opposing the Yahud in dyeing your hair. Abu Huraira reports that the Prophet said, إِنَّ الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى لَا يَسْبِغُونَ فَخَالِفُوهُمْ. The Jews and the Christians do not dye their hair, so oppose them. We find from the narration that the Muslim differentiates himself from the people of Kufr. If he would differentiate himself from the Jews and the Christians, as in this hadith, then how about the mushrikeen and other types of kuffar, which are even worse than that of the Yahud and Nasara? You should oppose them even more so. What is apparent here from the hadith, as the Prophet gives the order, khalifuhum, oppose them, is that this is by way of obligation, unless we have evidence otherwise. So we say, take and accept this order. Let's take the next chapter about angels not entering a house in which there is a dog or an image, and about images in the home, other than those for menial uses. Aisha reports that Jibreel alayhi salam promised the Prophet to meet him at an appointed time. But Jibreel did not come. The Prophet had a staff in his hand. He threw it down, and he said, مَا يُخْلِفُ اللَّهُ وَعْدَهُ وَلَا رُسُلُهُ. Never does Allah and His messengers, meaning the angels, break their promise. Then the Prophet cast a glance, and he saw a puppy under his bed. He said, Ya Aisha, مَتَى دَخَلَ هَذَا الْكَلْبُ هَا هُنَا. O Aisha, when did this dog enter here? She said, Wallahi ma daraytu. She did not know. The Prophet ordered that this puppy be sent out of the house. And then did Jibreel enter. The Prophet said to him, وَعَدْتَنِي فَجَلَسْتُ لَكَ فَلَمْ تَأْتِي. You promised me and I sat for you, but you did not come. And Jibreel answered, مَنَعَنِي الْكَلْبُ الَّذِي كَانَ فِي بَيْتِكَ إِنَّا لَا نَدْخُلُ بَيْتًا فِيهِ كَلْبٌ وَلَا صُورًا. The dog in your home prevented me from entering. We, meaning the angels, do not enter a house in which there is a dog or an image. We can take from this narration that angels do not enter a home in which there is a dog or images. Let's speak about the dog. We know that there are certain types of dogs which you are allowed to keep. The dog to guard your fields, the hunting dog, and the dog to guard your flock. This ruling, is it general for all dogs, those you're allowed to keep and those you're not allowed to keep? Or is it just for those dogs that you are not allowed to keep? Well, rationally thinking about it, if you're allowed to keep a particular dog, then how can you be punished by the angels not entering your home? We find the kuffar are so fond of keeping dogs, and the najasa in the saliva of the dogs can never be pure. And these are one of those phenomena that is observed in nature, that the khabith is for the khabith. The impure is attracted to impure, and the pure is attracted to pure. That's why the impurity of the saliva of the dog is the most impure substance. And we find that the kuffar are attracted to this impurity. It's not unusual then to find the dogs licking the owner, and the kuffar think this to be okay. As for the Muslim, he avoids the impure and is attracted to the pure. So with respect to dogs, we would say that this hadith applies to those dogs you are not allowed to keep. As for those dogs you are allowed to keep, then the hadith, rationally thinking about it, would not apply. Though if somebody wants to keep the permissible dog outside to be on the safe side, then this is fine. What about the surah? The surah can apply to a statue, a three-dimensional image. It can apply to a two-dimensional image as well, such as a painting or a photograph. All of this is a surah. Well, definitely three-dimensional images of humans, such as statues, and even of animals, such as tigers or bears, is impermissible. And you're not allowed to sit in such a place, because if you did, then it means that you are approving tacitly of such an action. You can also have paintings and photographs of people you venerate. If a person dies, let's say, they might put a portrait of such a person hanging on the wall. This is not unusual. And again, this is impermissible. In fact, images of people you venerate is haram from two angles. Firstly, angels do not enter such a house. Secondly, this is exactly how shirk began at the time of Nuh alayhi salam. And this ummah needs to cut off all of these means. Okay, what about images just for remembrance? Again, this is not unusual, it's quite common. You have on the mantelpieces photographs and images just to remember family members, friends, and so on. This is also haram according to this narration, but it is less haram than the images to venerate such pious people. What about putting images in an album? We have photograph albums or family albums. Again, that is impermissible according to this hadith. Angels do not enter such a home. One might say, but we are not hanging it up. It is just in an album, in a drawer, it is away from sight. We say, so was the dog away from sight underneath the bed of the Prophet. But Jibreel still did not enter. Then we can have images or photographs taken for a necessary reason, such as a driving license, or identification purposes, even images on money. No one disagrees that these types of images are permissible to keep because of necessity. What about those images that are not used for honored purposes, such as certain images you may find on pillows or on blankets or on cushions? Now, with these types of images, most scholars have allowed it, and some scholars have said even this is impermissible. And definitely the safer opinion is to avoid such images. What about those images hung up on curtains? We have a specific narration for that, and it is impermissible. And Aisha had a curtain with images, and the Prophet ordered that the curtain be ripped up. So these images which are hung up, such as images on curtains and wallpapers, then this is all impermissible. Okay, what about images on clothes? We say this is also impermissible according to this narration. However, what about images on nappies? Because nappies are clothing, but we can also argue from the other angle, taking the opinion of most scholars, that this is an image for a menial purpose. That is to say, lacking in any prestige. Here, both sides are understandable, but we feel that the safer option is to put nappies on your children which do not have images. And as long as you can find good alternatives, then there ought not to be a problem. And then we have images found in newspapers and magazines. Well, we can divide newspapers or magazines up into two types. First, you have those types of publications which are for the purpose of pictures, such as, for example, you may have a magazine of fashion. You have in them pictures of models wearing certain clothing which are being advertised. Then this is not allowed in the house, and it will prevent the angels. Not only that, but they will encourage the Muslims to wear the clothing of the kuffar, and oftentimes clothing which are not befitting the mu'min. Then you have newspapers and magazines which are for the purpose of news and information, but they happen to have images as well to supplement the information. Here, out of necessity, it is difficult to get rid of such things, and so there is no sin in such magazines and newspapers. It will be similar to having money on which there are images. It's difficult to avoid this. You could say, well, just do not read any magazine or newspaper, but the people are in need of such things, and a general widespread need is to be treated as a necessity, such as cars. You do not need a car. There is public transport as the alternative option, but the car is seen as a necessity because its need is so widespread, which is why we would permit then insurance on the car, whereas insurance is haram in its asl. And then we have images for children. Now this could be in books and magazines. Let's say teaching the children alphabet. If we say B is for bear, it will have a picture of a bear. And a bear is an animal, a living creature, and so on. Or perhaps you can also have cartoons. They are images, which are drawn by hand. And then you can also have toys which have images, such as dolls and action figures. This is permissible for children, and we actually have in the Sunan authentic evidence for this. Aisha had a horse with wings. Well, a horse is a living creature. And so these images for children, for their play and education, is permitted. Well, that deals with still images, be it 3D or 2D, be it painting or photographs. And there is a slight difference of opinion amongst photographs as well, whether it is to be included in a hand-drawn picture or not. We feel the better option is to include it as well. They are essentially the same thing. They're 2D still pictures. But anyway, moving away from that to videos. So these are moving images. But it seems apparent to us, and Allah knows best, that moving images are not the same as still images, even if they are all images. Otherwise then, looking at yourself in the mirror ought not to be permissible, because that is also an image. But it's a moving image, and so with videos it would be a similar matter. And so in that case, the question is, what is this video being made for? Even if it has a human being in it or animals. If it's for a permissible purpose, then that's fine. If it's for an impermissible purpose, then that is not fine. Another question is, if there is an image in one room of the house, but not in the other rooms of the house, then will the angels simply refuse to enter that particular room, or the whole house, knowing that there are no images in the rest of the house? This is an interesting question. You can argue either way. We do not enter a home in which there is an image. It implies the whole house will not be entered in. Or we may look at it another way, that the angels do not enter a place in which there is an image. So that means the angels will not enter that room alone, but that they can enter other rooms. It would make for an interesting debate. However, in the real practical world, we would go with the safer option. And we would say do not have an image even in a single room. We may also take from the narration that you do not enter a place in which there is a munkar, unless you're able to change it, because Jibreel did not enter this place. And also we find that Jibreel promised the Prophet that he will meet him there. And apparently the Prophet became somewhat confused as he threw away his staff, saying that Allah and His messengers, meaning the angels, do not break a promise. We find that you are allowed to break a promise if in fulfilling the promise you would be either undertaking a munkar or acknowledging a munkar. We may also take from the narration that the Prophet does not know the unseen, otherwise he would have known why Jibreel did not enter. And this is in refutation to those who claim that the Prophet knows the unseen. In a narration in the same chapter of Maymuna, there is an addition that when the Prophet found out that angels do not enter a house in which there is a dog, he commanded that all dogs be killed. Even dogs kept for small orchards be killed, except the dogs which are used to guard the big orchards. So it ought to be known that initially dogs were to be killed, and this is because the Prophet did not want dogs to enter a home, thus depriving the people of the presence of the angels. Because if the angels do not enter your home, then the shayateen certainly will. But afterwards this ruling was abrogated, and the type of dog you are allowed to kill would be the jet black dog or the biting dog. Another narration in the chapter from Aisha, who says that she put a carpet on a door to screen it. When the Prophet came back from his expedition, he saw this, and he had signs of disapproval on his face. He pulled it out and tore it, and said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَأْمُرْنَا أَن نَكْسُوَ الْحِجَارَةَ وَالطِّينَ. Allah has not ordered us to clothe stones and clay. Aisha says that she tore this curtain and used it as stuffing for cushions, and the Prophet did not find anything wrong with it. We take from this narration from Aisha that it is detested and makruh to be excessive in decoration, because this means you're too excessively indulging in luxury, and this is contrary to how the Muslim lives his life, because draping stones and clay is excessively luxurious, and it is not befitting. As for if you have to put a clothing or a curtain on a wall to keep the home warm during winter, then there will be no problem in that, because this is now not for luxury, it is necessary purpose. And what further supports this is the next narration, where Aisha reports that whenever a visitor would come to the house, we had a curtain which had pictures of birds on it, and the visitor would immediately be faced with it. Thereupon the Prophet said, change this, because it reminds me of the dunya whenever I come home. So we find that the Muslim should distance himself from anything that will entice him to the luxuries of this world. Of course, these are the luxuries of deception. In this day and age, almost in any country you live in, from all directions you're going to have temptations of this world. It is difficult to avoid all these temptations, so it is incumbent upon the Muslim to follow the example of the Prophet ﷺ, and to try his best to really strive to distance himself from that which will entice him to the materialistic, deceptive worldly pleasures and luxury. In another wording, it says that the curtain had pictures of a horse with wings, and the Prophet commanded Aisha to pull it away. So whether it was a horse with wings or a bird, the point is that it reminded the Prophet of worldly pleasure and luxury, because it was a type of decoration, and this decoration reminded the Prophet of this world, so it would cause a distraction. So just take a look at the high standards of the Prophet ﷺ in detaching himself from anything that could even vaguely distract him towards this materialistic world. Nowadays we find so many Muslims indulging themselves in just a bit more than a simple curtain with pictures of birds or horsed wings on them. Fallahul musta'an. Also in the chapter from Aisha, she said, I had hung on the door of the home a thin curtain having pictures on it. The Prophet saw it and the complexion of his face changed. He tore the curtain and said, Inna min ashad al-nasi adhaban yawm al-qiyamah alladhina yushabbihuna bi khalqillah. Verily from the worst punished on Yawm al-Qiyamah will be those who imitate the creation of Allah. So in this narration, there is a clear prohibition on drawing or sculpturing an image of a human being or animal, because you are imitating the creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala, which you have no right to do, because Allah determines what rights you have and what rights you do not have. But notice here that Aisha is not the one who drew the pictures. That was done by somebody else. She was merely using it. And so even that was not permissible, because if you use the services of those who draw pictures, then it will simply encourage them. So in effect, you would be helping them in their sin, and you would also help their business. And from here we can say that it is not permissible to go out on a vacation to the countries of the kuffar, because you will be injecting money into their economy, quite apart from the fact that you would be subjecting yourself to the fitnah in their country. We can find nowadays in many places pictures or portraits of leaders and rulers hung up on walls, and this is exaggeration in their praise. Pictures and portraits of rulers and even scholars should not be put up, as it is exaggeration. In another wording of the same narration, Aisha says that we tore this curtain which had the images and we made a cushion or two out of it. Note that we can take from this narration that making these images of human faces and animals is a major sin, because such people are from those who are the most worst punished. Note also that the prohibition is on imitating the creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Therefore, making images of those things which do not exist, let's say a dragon or some sort of mythical creature, then this is not imitating the creation of Allah, and hence it is permissible to make that type of image. Note also that she tore up the curtain and made this curtain into cushions. Now the question is, was the image still present on the cushion? Because most scholars will say the image is still present on the cushion, and this is because the image now is being used for a menial purpose, a purpose without much prestige, sitting on a cushion, as opposed to hanging it up on a door or a wall or some other prestigious purpose like that, in which case the images are impermissible. So from here then we find this difference of opinion. But let us take a look at this next narration. Again from Aisha, she said that she bought
a cushion
which had pictures on it. When the Prophet came and saw it, he stayed at the door and did not enter the home. She says, I perceived signs of disgust on his face. Aisha said, Ya Rasulullah, atubu ilallahi wa ila rasulih. O Messenger of Allah, I make tawbah to Allah and to His Messenger.
The Prophet asked, what are these cushions all about?
And Aisha said, I bought it for you so that you might sit on it and take rest on it, so lean on it. And to that the Prophet replied, Inna ashaba hadhihi as-suwar yu'adhabuna wa yuqalu lahum ahyu ma khalaqtum. People who make these images, they will be punished, and it will be said to them, put life into that which you created. And the Prophet went on to say, Inna al-bayt alladhi fihi as-suwar la tadkhuluhu al-malaika. Angels do not enter a home in which there are images. Some great lessons to be learned from this narration. The first lesson is a problem which we face. Aisha is saying that I make tawbah to Allah and to His Messenger. Tawbah is an act of ibadah, and it cannot be directed to the Messenger. Yet we find the Prophet acknowledge this. How did he then acknowledge it? Because the problem is you cannot make tawbah to the Messenger of Allah, neither independently, so you cannot say I make tawbah to the Messenger, and neither could you do it in following the name of Allah, so that you would say I make tawbah to Allah and to His Messenger, because tawbah is solely for Allah Jalla wa Ala. In the same way you cannot say that I will make hajj for Allah and for the Messenger. No, this is shirk. Or that I will make my salah for Allah and for the Messenger. Again, you do not make acts of ibadah to the Messenger, or make dua to Allah and to the Messenger. Again, shirk. So the way we reconcile this problem is that we say that tawbah in the Shari'i sense is an act of ibadah only for Allah Jalla wa Ala. However, tawbah in the lexical sense means to return. And so what Aisha meant here is that she wants to return back to the messenger after she has done something which angers the messenger. She now wants to do that which will please him. So that is, she wants to return back to the good books of the messenger. This is purely in the lexical sense, not in the Shari'i sense of tawbah of ibadah. We also find a great lesson from this narration is that this carpet is there for the Prophet to sit on, and it had images. So we find that the better opinion is that even those images used for menial purposes, like sitting on and cushions, they should not have images either, even though most scholars say that images for uses which do not have any prestige are allowed to be used, such as cushions or carpets which are walked on.
But this narration specifically mentions a numruqa, which means a small cushion.
And the Prophet did not approve of it. When we talk about images, is it images of anything? No, it is images of either humans with their faces in particular, and also animals with their faces. We're not talking about just any image of plants and
mountains and homes and
computers and whatever else. We find making these images is a major sin because there's a specific punishment. Previously, we were told that they are from the worst punished on Yawm al-Qiyamah, those who imitate the creation of Allah. And here we are told that such people will be told to put life to that which you have created. And this is because only Allah Jalla wa Ala breathes the soul into the human or into the animal. No one else has the ability to do this. So why are you then imitating this creation? The narration says, إِنَّ أَصْحَابَ هَذِهِ الصُّوَرِ يُعَذَّبُونَ. The people of these images. What does that mean? Those who make the image or those who use these images for curtains and so on? Well, the next narration sheds some light from Ibn Umar that the Prophet says, الَّذِينَ يَصْنَعُونَ الصُّوَرِ يُعَذَّبُونَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يُقَالُ لَهُمْ أَحْيُوا مَا خَلَقْتُمْ. Those people who make the images will be punished on Yawm al-Qiyamah. It will be said, give life to that which you created. Although even from the first narration it ought to be known that it is those who make the images, because the punishment is that they will be ordered, أَحْيُوا مَا خَلَقْتُمْ, give life to that which you created. So it has to be talking about those who make the images. We also find that humans can make khalq or create things, but their creation is not like the creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because the creation of humans requires materials, whereas Allah Jalla wa Ala, He creates the materials, and from the materials would create whatever else He needs to. So He does not require anything in the very, very first place. Also, the narration from Ibn Abbas in the same chapter, مَنْ صَوَّرَ صُورَةً فِي الدُّنْيَا كُلِّفَ أَنْ يُنْفِقَ فِيهَا الرُّوحَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَلَيْسَ بِنَافِخٍ. The one who makes images will be burdened to blow the soul in this image on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and he will be unable to do so. In the chapter we also have a narration from Ibn Abbas who gives the advice that if you must draw, then make an image of a tree, and that which does not have a soul. So really these images are all about images which have a soul, and the only things we know which have a soul are humans and animals, and in particular it is the face. So if you see an image of a human or an animal, then the minimum that must be done is that the face should be wiped out. Also from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, قال الله عز وجل ومن أظلم ممن ذهب يخلق خلقا كخلقي فليخلق ذرة أو ليخلق حبة أو ليخلق شعيرة. Allah says, so this is a hadith Qudsi, who is more wrong than the one who creates a creation like my creation? Then let him create a small ant, or let him create a grain of wheat, or let him create a grain of barley. So again, the problem here is with the imitation of the creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Some people may use this narration to say that you're not even allowed to make pictures of plants and even grains, because Allah challenges to create even a small ant or a grain of wheat or a grain of barley, and hence they would say that even plants are impermissible to be drawn. But as Ibn Abbas stated, that trees are permissible to be drawn, and anything which does not have a soul in it. And like we said, only animals and humans are ones with a soul, not trees and not some sort of imaginary personalities or figures, which are, let's say, mythical figures. The next chapter, about a dog or a bell on a journey. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا تصحب الملائكة رفقة فيها كلب ولا جرس. The malaika do not accompany travelers who have with them a dog or a bell. Also in the chapter from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, Al-jarasu mazamiru shaytan. The bell is the musical instrument of the shaytan. The mizmar is a wooden flute, and so it is the quote-unquote the wooden flute of shaytan. And we say it's not just bells, but any musical instrument. And as for the dogs, then this would be similar to the malaika not entering a home in which there is a dog. The saliva of the dog is najis, and the bark of the dog is disturbing. But we would make exception with the 3 types of exceptional dogs.
Now, with regards to bells, are you allowed to use bells? The answer is yes, if it is for a genuine need. You find doorbells, you find bells in schools, and you can have all types of different bells for different uses, and it is permissible to use. The hadith talks about bells on a journey, and this is for amusement purposes, so that becomes a musical instrument and therefore not permissible. So the bells, which are the mazamir shaitan, are for musical purposes, not for genuine purposes. Also note that the word mizmar and the plural mazamir can refer to an elegant voice, though originally it refers to a flute.
The next chapter, about hanging a necklace around a camel's neck. Abu Bashir al-Ansari, he was with the Prophet on a journey, and the Prophet sent a messenger to inform the people, لا يبقين في رقبة بعير قلادة من وتر أو قلادة إلا قطعت. No necklace of strings, or just any necklace, should be left on the neck of a camel, except that it needs to be cut off. And Imam Malik says that the reason for this is because they used to put necklaces on the necks of the camel to protect them from the evil eye. And this comment from Imam Malik is vital. If people are putting a necklace around the animals to protect it from the evil eye, then either this is major shirk if they think that the necklace itself will do the protection, or it is minor shirk if they think that Allah will protect the animal because of this necklace. And the reason is because they've created a sabab, a cause, for which they have no evidence, and that is shirk. As for if you put a necklace on the animal for beautification purposes or other valid purposes, then this is permissible. Let us now move to the next chapter, about the forbiddance of beating the animal on the face or cauterizing it there. Jabir reports that the Prophet forbade that the face be hit or struck, and he also forbade that the face be cauterized or branded. Another narration in the chapter by Jabir as well, there passed by the Prophet a donkey whose face had been cauterized, and the Prophet said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الَّذِي وَسَمَهُ. Allah curses the one who cauterized it. 2 prohibitions here. Firstly is hitting the face. Now the narration is general, it does not mention animals at all. Jabir says that the Prophet forbade hitting the face. Now if hitting the face of animals is prohibited, and hitting the face of humans is even more so prohibited because they are yet more honored. And if cauterizing the face of animals is prohibited, and the Prophet said, may Allah curse the one who cauterized it, then cauterizing the faces of humans is also prohibited. In fact, any type of defacement is prohibited. The face is something honored, by which you are recognized as a unique person. However, from Ibn Abbas in the same chapter, we have a narration in which the Prophet permitted cauterizing the donkey on the buttocks, and they would do this as a medicinal practice. And they can also cauterize the animals so as to leave a mark on it so people will know whom this animal belongs to. Sometimes animals of the zakah need to be marked, or the animals sent as a hadi to be sacrificed at the Kaaba during the Hajj or the Umrah, they are marked. But you never cut it or mark it or cauterize it on the face, either on the humps or on the buttocks or somewhere else, away from the face. As for hitting the face, then no, this is never permissible, neither to animals and a fortiori to humans. The next chapter about the permissibility of cauterizing animals other than humans on other than the face. Anas reports that Sulaym, his mother, gave birth to a child, and Anas brought this child to the Prophet so that the Prophet could make tahniq on the child. That is, the Prophet would chew some dates so that the juice of the dates would flow, and then make the baby taste this juice. Anyway, so he says that he came to the Prophet, and the Prophet was busy cauterizing the sheep. And one of the narrators, Shu'bah, says that the most I know is that he was cauterizing the ears. So the point is, you can cauterize animals if there is a need to do so, but not on the face. One might say, but is this not muthla or mutilation? The answer is that this is an exception because there is a genuine need to do so. But the general case is, yes, you do not mutilate humans nor animals. The next chapter about the disapproval of al-qaza', which is when you shave some part of the head off and leave the other part unshaved. From Ibn Umar, he says the Prophet forbade al-qaza', and Nafi', his freed servant, asked, "What is qaza'?" And he replied that you shave part of the head of a child and you leave the other part. First of all, the child is mentioned when you shave part of the head of a child. So is this specific to children? The answer is no. It is for everybody. Secondly, is it then not permissible to cut some part of the head and leave the other? So maybe you have longer hair on certain part of the head, so you just want to cut it and leave the other part because they're not so long. The answer is yes, this is permissible if you want to even out the hair. And that is what is required, that the whole head be symmetrical. You can even cut some part of the head and leave the other part as long as it does not show that your head is asymmetrical. Where we draw the line or the threshold is when it outwardly shows that your head is asymmetrical and uneven. That is makruh. And if your hairstyle is such that it resembles certain types of kuffar, so let's say a particular hairstyle specific to them, then this act would be outright haram, because you're resembling the kuffar or a group of evil people or disbelieving people. The next chapter about the prohibition of sitting on the roads or the pathway and giving the path its due right. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, the Prophet said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْجُلُوسَ فِي الطُّرُقَاتِ. Beware of sitting on the pathway. They said, Ya Rasulullah, مَا لَنَا بُدٌّ مِنْ مَجَالِسِنَا نَتَحَدَّثُ فِيهَا. They said, we can only find these places to sit together and speak with one another. And the Prophet said, فَإِذَا أَبَيْتُمْ إِلَّا الْمَجْلِسِ فَأَعْطُوا الطَّرِيقَ حَقَّهُ. If you insist that you should sit there, then you must give the path its due right. They said, وَمَا حَقُّهُ? What is its due right? He said, غَضُّ الْبَصَرِ وَكَفُّ الْأَذَى وَرَدُّ السَّلَامِ وَالْأَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيُ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. He mentioned 4 items: to lower the gaze, to avoid harming anyone, to reply back to the salam, to the one who gives you the salam, and fourthly, to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. This is one of those hadith where you can go on and on speaking about its many diverse fawaid or points of benefit, but we will restrict our speech here. The general rule is that you do not sit on the roadside. Rather, you sit together, if you want to come together, in a private place. And that's because sitting by the roadside or on the pathway can entail many problems, such as not lowering the gaze as women walk past, and you could be causing a nuisance to the people. However, it is still possible to sit on the pathways as long as you lower the gaze, so you do not look at non-mahram women, that you do not cause any annoyance or inconvenience to anybody passing by, and that you must reply to the salam, because as you're sitting in this public place, people are going to walk by, and if people walk by, they will give you the salam, because the one who walks by, he gives the salam to those who are sitting down. So therefore it is incumbent upon you to reply back. It is fard kifaya to reply back, unless the person directs his salam to you, and you know that to be the case. Therefore it is fardu ayn upon you to reply back. As you're sitting with each other, you do not backbite either, which is an easy sin to fall into. Also, if you're sitting on the pathway, it's a public place, you may well see somebody doing an evil action or not doing that which he's supposed to do. So enjoining the good and forbidding the evil is a requirement of the road or public pathway. The next chapter, about those women who changed the creation of Allah. Asma bint Abi Bakr reports that a woman came to the Prophet and she said to him that I have married my daughter off and her hair is falling, but her husband likes the hair to be long. May I add false hair to her head? And the Prophet forbade it. Also in the chapter from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, He said that Allah curses those women who tattoo or have themselves tattooed, or those who pluck their eyebrows, and those who have their eyebrows plucked for them, and those who make spaces between their teeth for beautification purposes, changing the creation of Allah. Now this statement of Ibn Mas'ud reached a woman from the tribe of Asad. The woman was Ya'qub, and she was a reciter of the Quran. She came to Abdullah and said, "This news has reached me, that you curse such and such women, that is the washimat, mustawshimat, wal-mutanammisat, wal-mutafallijat, lil-husn." And Abdullah replied, "Why should I not curse the one whom the Prophet has cursed? And it is in the book also," meaning the Quran. She says, "But I have recited the Quran from cover to cover, but I did not find it in that." Whereupon Abdullah said, "If you read it, you would find it." Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the messenger gives you, then you take it. Whatever he forbids you, then refrain from it. Then Ya'qub said, "But I have seen something of that on your wife." Abdullah said to her, "Go and take a look at her." So she went and verified this, and she did not find anything of that on Abdullah's wife. She came back and told him. Abdullah said, "If she did have anything of that on her, we would not have conjugal relations with her." So this is the narration. In fact, let us add another narration found at the beginning of this chapter. Asma bint Abi Bakr reports that a woman came to the Prophet and said that she has a newlywed daughter who has a certain disease or a medical condition in which her hair is falling off. So can I add false hair to her head because her husband likes it like that, meaning long hair? And the Prophet replied simply, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاصِلَةَ وَالْمُسْتَوْصِلَةَ. Allah curses the woman who puts false hair on another and the one who demands or asks that this be done to her. That is to say, false hair put on her. We find from the narration of Abdullah that tattooing, putting it on and having it put on you is haram, it is cursed, not just for women, because they would most often do this, but for men as well. Also the namisa, this is thinning the eyebrows. So thinning somebody else's eyebrow or having it thinned for you is impermissible, because it is a type of deception. And we're talking about here just for beautification purposes, not for medical purposes. That is different. And also making a gap between the teeth. Women would often do this for beautification purposes, otherwise it applies to men as well, in theory, if that was to be done. And he says that they are changing the creation of Allah. By putting on tattoos, you are defacing the creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala. We find that a person may recite the Quran, but he may not understand it fully, as this woman. And she did not understand why such women are cursed until Abdullah ibn Mas'ud pointed it out to her. And whatever the Prophet gives, then you must take it. So we go by the generality of the wording in the Quran. We do not go by the specificity of the cause for revelation. The cause of this revelation was the spoils of war. Whatever he gives you, take it. Whatever he forbids you, then refrain from it. But we go by the generality of the wording. And this is the rule that the ulama have laid down. Well, what about colored contact lenses for beautification purposes? Men do not need to do so, but women can. This would be like jewelry or makeup, though the matter is controversial. We also learn the lesson, do not marry any women who are practicing these vulgar practices and licentious or evil women. As Ibn Mas'ud said, we would not even have conjugal relations with her if she was doing any of this. This is where the righteous people are for righteous women and vice versa, and then the evil men are for evil women and vice versa. Filth attracts each other and purity attracts each other. Also in the chapter, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan was on the minbar and he took out some false hair, showing it to the people. He said, "O people of Medina, where are your scholars? I heard the Prophet forbidding this," meaning adding false hair to your head. And the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا هَلَكَتْ بَنُو إِسْرَائِيلَ حِينَ اتَّخَذَ هَذِهِ نِسَاؤُهُمْ. Banu Israel were destroyed when their women took this, meaning added false hair on. Also in the chapter it says that this is az-zur, or falsehood. So you're displaying something which is false. And this is where colored contact lenses could be argued that this is from this. You're showing the color of your eyes to be something other than it is. We do understand this argument. And the lenient opinion would be that it is under the heading of beautification and jewelry and makeup. It does seem to us that the safer option is to avoid colored contact lenses, because there is a danger, we feel, that it is from the zur, or when you show something to be other than what it really is. Just like adding false hair and wigs and putting a gap between your teeth and thinning the eyebrows. We also find that such people are cursed, hence it is a major sin. Muawiyah says, where are your ulama, where are your scholars? Because the people of knowledge were not prohibiting this munkar at that particular time. So if you have knowledge, you must enjoin the good and prohibit the evil to the extent of your knowledge.
Okay, what about wearing wigs? There are some scholars who say that if a woman's hair completely falls off, such that she becomes bald due to some medical condition, then she is allowed to wear a wig. And this would come under the heading of treatment, not the beautification. They argue by saying that wearing a wig does not come under the prohibition of joining the hair on, because the prohibition is when you join on artificial hair to your natural hair, and this creates a deception. Whereas wearing a wig, it is on a bald head, so that there is no natural hair in the first place. However, wearing wigs just for beautification purposes would definitely be adding hair to your natural hair. And the other opinion would be that wearing wigs comes under the same ruling as hair extensions and therefore is haram. What about lawyers wearing these white wigs in courts? This is permissible, and it is not actually a wig, it is more akin to a head covering. A wig resembles your hair, and this head covering for lawyers does not resemble the hair because it is obvious and easy to see that this is just a head covering and not part of the original hair. In any case, we have two opinions for bald people to wear a wig. One is the lenient one and the other is the strict one, and whichever one chooses to adopt, we hope there will be no sin on him, and Allah knows best.
Let's take the next chapter about women wearing clothes yet being naked. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, "Sinfani min ahli an-nar lam arahuma." Two types of people from the fire I have not seen yet. قوم معهم سياط كأذناب البقر يضربون بها الناس. People with whips like the tails of cows whipping the people. ونساء كاسيات عاريات مميلات مائلات رؤوسهن كأسنمة البخت المائلة لا يدخلن الجنة ولا يجدن ريحها وإن ريحها ليوجد من مسيرة كذا وكذا. And women wearing clothes yet naked, inclining and making others incline. Their heads are like the humps of the camels, leaning to one side. They will not enter Jannah nor smell its fragrance, even though its fragrance can be smelled from a distance of such and such. What does it mean by clothing yet naked? Well, this could mean either covering some parts of the body and uncovering others, thus enticing people thereby, or it could also mean wearing see-through clothing, and it can also mean wearing extremely tight clothing which makes out the shape of the body. It could mean all of those. As for inclining and making others incline, what does that mean? It's been suggested that they incline to sin and make others incline to sinful actions as well. It has been said that they walk in an inclined fashion with a swagger, and making something else incline, meaning they make their shoulders incline. It has also been said that they have an inclined hairstyle like the prostitutes would have, and make other women's hairstyle in that way as well. But the more apparent meaning is the second suggestion. They walk in an inclined fashion and they incline their shoulders. Also now we find the prohibition of women to stack up their hair on top of their head and to make it look like a camel's hump. And the lesson we take from this narration is to avoid being in these two categories, because we find that this is a major sin due to the specific warning given.
Also, another note about women clothed yet naked. Another interpretation is that they are clothed just as normal, yet they are naked with regards to the clothing of taqwa, because taqwa is also a clothing just like your physical clothing. It hides your private parts and it hides your shame. So this is a more, if you like, spiritual interpretation. Likewise with the ma'ilat and mumilat, the ma'il would be inclining away from the truth and mumil would be making others incline away from the truth. So again, this is not pertaining to any physical attribute, but rather a more spiritual interpretation. Now we mention this, even though the context of the hadith does appear to be much more of a physical context, so physical clothing and the physical manner of walking, and Allah knows best.
Okay, let's take the last chapter about wearing garments of falsehood. From Aisha, a woman came to the Prophet and said that I have a co-wife Can I give her the impression that my husband has given me something which in fact he has not? And the Prophet told her, Al-mutashabbi' bima lam yu'ta kalabisi thawbay az-zur. The one who creates this impression of receiving what one has not been given is like the one who wears two garments of falsehood. Mutashabbi' is when you take your fill. The one who takes his fill from that which he has not been given. This woman is going to pretend that her husband gives her so much when in fact he does not. And this is in order to make the other wife jealous. So the one who pretends that he has much when he does not in fact have much in terms of materialistic wealth or ability or other than that, then he's like the one who wears two garments of falsehood. That is to say, the garments he has taken from someone else and he wears it as if they belong to him. Thus, of course, that is deception, because even though it looks like they belong to him, in reality, they do not. And so likewise here, the woman is pretending that her husband gives her much, so it may seem that way, but in reality it is not. Or some people pretend they have such and such an ability
to show off in front of people, whereas in reality, they do not possess the purported ability. Just a few more points of benefit. Now, with regards to az-za'afran, we do have conflicting reports. There are some reports which may either directly or indirectly suggest that za'afran is permissible for men. In a case like this, we take the safer option, which is to say that it is impermissible for men. Also, with regards to dyeing the hair black, there are some scholars who allowed women to dye their hair black for beautification purposes. The only problem is we do not see any evidence for a takhsis, so we would not recommend such a thing. Especially when the prohibition is actually extremely severe. In other narrations we find the Prophet saying, يَكُونُ قَوْمٌ يَخْضِبُونَ فِي آخِرِ الزَّمَانِ بِالسَّوَادِ كَحَوَاصِلِ الْحَمَامِ لَا يَرِيحُونَ رَائِحَةَ الْجَنَّةِ. At the end of times there will be a people dyeing their hair with black, like the chest of the birds. These people will not even smell the fragrance of Jannah. This hadith is authentic in the Musnad of Ahmad. And what is apparent from the narrations is that it is an obligation to dye your white hair, because it is an obligation to differ from the kuffar. Let us take some review questions. So question number 1. What type of dye is not allowed for men on their clothing, and what is the reason for this? Question number 2. What is the ruling on having images of real life living creatures, humans or animals, in the home? Question number 3. What are the rules that must be observed if you are going to sit in a public place?